All right, hello everybody. Day 4 of the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference. It is also the equinox, so that means it's an important time of year, and we are more than halfway through the conference. I cannot believe it. So right now I'm going to give you the full day summary in case you missed anything, in case you want to know what materials you need for what class, in case you want to just get a sort of Reader's Digest version of all of the keynotes today, because today there were more keynotes and conversations than there were classes. So let's just dive right in with the poem. This morning's poem, I don't know why, but my drawing of John Muir Laws, it wasn't my best drawing of John Muir Laws, but if you draw your teachers and speakers every day, it at least gives you something to do and you get better at drawing people. His head is a little bit big. The poem this morning was Sometimes by David Whyte, and it was a lot about questions that can make or unmake a life, questions that are waiting for you. And the challenge, and I think you still have time if you want to do the challenge, was to use I Notice, I Wonder, It Reminds Me Of outward, but also inward, and then turn that into a poem. So the daily challenge, you post on Instagram, the Facebook group, or on Wild Wonder, and you use the hashtag Wild Wonder Challenge, and you can win a $25 gift certificate or something like that to the store. So these happen every day. That's what today's was. First class was with Sushma Hegde, and here is my first drawing of her, and my first mistake for her class was Lush Beauty of Garden Blooms in Watercolor. I started my sketch notes for her on the bottom of a page, and then it ended up, because it was such a lush, juicy, she was all about the juicy colors, I couldn't turn back to this page to add more quotes. So I'll just read you some of the ones from here. Don't worry about getting exact color. Let's focus on techniques and strokes. I want to help you relax with your painting. Those 3 quotes kind of summarize her teaching style and this class. If you know, she's Instagram famous. I think she has like 300,000 followers. She has a whole book that's really popular, multiple online classes, and when you look at her florals, you get an idea of why. Her techniques are very accessible, but they're also very evocative. So when you see the way that she creates these floral arrangements, they're really quite beautiful. And one thing though, I was a little bit frustrated in her class last year because I didn't have the right paintbrushes. I think this year I still didn't have the right paintbrushes, but I tried to just follow along and really pay attention. You can see all of my notes here. These are all notes. These are all notes about her different brushstrokes. These are all experiments trying to follow her brushstrokes. This is what I recommend if you're trying to learn from a class like this. At least this is the way my brain works. I need to be sort of all over the place, taking lots of notes, trying to draw diagrams, in addition to just following along with the painting. So I have notes about which brushes I used, which brushes didn't work. She is on the side of the spectrum where she cleans her palette a lot, so very different from Meryl Jamila, who taught the class on gouache painting the other day. So one thing that you'll see, and if you're a beginner, this could be really frustrating, but what you'll see is sometimes you're getting completely opposite recommendations from different teachers. One teacher will say, like Nishant Jain, he's teaching tomorrow, he'll say it's really important to have long lines. Make one confident line going all the way down to the bottom. And then you have another teacher like Sophia Gazarian who says, no, make lots of small marks along the way. So don't get frustrated if 2 people say completely opposite things. That's normal, that's nature, and that is art. So Sushma has different techniques from some of the other people I have been teaching so far, but what I recommend is for these classes, just try to get into it as much as possible, follow along as much as possible, and take lots of notes. If you know how to do sketchnoting, this is really helpful. Sketchnoting is really helpful at this conference. The next class after that was all about our 8-legged friends, and it was with Verena Hilgartner. I didn't write her name underneath, but you can see it right here. She is also another famous Instagrammer, and she has been really, really, really instrumental in spreading nature journaling in Germany. She's in Berlin, but she's also helped start lots of clubs all around the entire country of Germany, and she had a really fun class. This class was really fun, and also what I liked about her class was it was all about how to use nature journaling. It was like a specific strategy to deal with animals or organisms that you're either afraid of, grossed out by, or maybe just don't know well enough. So her entire class was built up. Even if you're afraid of spiders, this is the perfect class for you. In fact, I feel like this class is best for people that are afraid of spiders. We didn't even really start with images of spiders, so it wouldn't scare you. What we started with was their colors. So look at this cool graphic that we made showing the colors of spiders and describing those colors before we even looked at the spider bodies. So this was a genius way to get people to fall in love with spiders, ask questions about spiders, and we made this entire zine, How to Fall in Love with Spiders, and each person got to follow along and make it in their own way. So there was a lot of opportunity in this class for you to do your own thing. Did I fold it wrong? I folded it wrong when I put it back in. No, wait. I'll figure that out later, but I glued my zine into here, so that was a little bit of a weird move. There we go. Yes, there we go. So it was a really cool way to incorporate zines. This is already the second one of the conference into a nature journaling class, and I still didn't quite finish it. Oh wait, that's still not quite right. Anyways, I folded up that zine, and now it's in my nature journal. So a great example of how to use scrapbooking techniques from my class to just squeeze more things into your nature journal. And then, oh my gosh, this class with Jack was crazy. He painted his face. That's my impersonation of him. He painted his face to look like a puffin. He wore a tuxedo for the class, and then we also had a dance party in the middle of his class. He had some great quotes here. The puffins will know if you don't dance. The conservation is working. Pet the puffin with your pencil. And there was a lot of practical tips to get you drawing puffins accurately. Right here you can see the unguided contour, aka blind contour drawing of puffins to get a warm-up in. We went really deep dive into the anatomy of puffins. He talked about the anatomy of puffins and a bunch of exercises to help you draw these. So if your puffins come out looking weird, don't worry. Puffins are one of those things, I would say they're objectively hard to draw. So if your puffin doesn't look like a puffin, don't worry. You can see here a lot of my drawings like this is completely off, that silhouette. These are pretty off. Look at that beak right there. This is not an easy animal to draw, so one thing that can really help is to make a bunch of small drawings. So just keep trying. And also these blind contour, aka unguided contour, that is also a good way because there's a lot of psychological obstacles here. This is objectively hard to draw. If your first drawing doesn't look like a puffin and you start getting sad about it and giving up, that's not the best way to end. So keep trying. It's a hard animal to draw. His class was a good way to get started, and it was fun. A lot of information about puffins. Then after that, we had talks. The rest of the day was talks. That was the last actual class of the day. And the first talk was with Steve Kress and Derek Jackson from Project Puffin. So here you can see my sketch notes. That's Steve Kress. He doesn't look that weird. This is just not the greatest drawing of him. He was instrumental. He revolutionized conservation and conservation projects with seabirds. He had some amazing factoids about puffins and a lot of interesting historical stuff about this project on near Hog Island on Egg Island, and about the history of how puffins and even some other really common birds such as gulls almost went extinct. Can you believe that herring gulls almost went extinct? And the herring gulls, once there was legal protections of them, the herring gulls bounced back. But other birds, such as puffins, needed a little bit more help. And that's where Project Puffin stepped in. So I tried to take notes during the whole thing. They started doing their work there, reintroducing them from Canada into the coast of Maine on some of these islands in 1973, and they raised some babies there successfully on the island, and those babies went out to sea, because that's how these animals work. It's really crazy. They are raised by their parents with a lot of parental care, but when they're like 4 to 6 weeks old, is that right? Once the chicks are old enough, they go out to sea by themselves, and they spend like 3 years out in the ocean completely by themselves, not even coming to land. So this is a really crazy animal, and they waited for 8 years before any of the puffins came back to that island to breed. So that was a stressful moment, and in the backstage pass, there was a lot of conversation about how much hope, how much sort of stubbornness is required from someone working in conservation to stick to it for 8 years when you don't see that animal coming back, and you've been trying to explain to everybody why this is an important project, even though there's a lot of naysayers. So that was a really, really interesting topic. Also, he basically discovered this concept of social attraction. This was the first time in history where a conservation project used decoy animals. So animals that look like the real thing, to get those animals to come back to an area to start breeding there again, or to use them for a conservation purpose. Decoys had been used for hunting for thousands and thousands of years, but this was the first time that we know of that they were used for conservation. Then Derek Jackson spoke next, and Derek Jackson's a photographer and worked a lot with the same project, Project Puffin. And he's a photographer, and he spent a lot of time observing the foods that the puffins were bringing back, and how we can learn so much by these different things that the puffins are bringing back on different years. You can learn a lot, because herring was one of the main things that they would depend on, but during some years there was a big crash in herring, and this is really connected to ocean temperatures and climate change. So here I tried to draw that sometimes the birds, terns, and puffins have to fly really far away to find the food that they need. So Derek was observing how this food changes, what they're bringing back, and he learned so much from that. He talked about how the Project Puffin is almost a fairy tale. He says it's almost a fairy tale because now the puffins are basically the canary in the coal mine for ocean warming. So these puffins right here are showing us, like the canary in the coal mine, when things are changing, how it's impacting them, and how that impact is going to affect us as people as well. And he made this wonderful segue then into social justice and environmental justice, and how oftentimes these negative impacts of climate change, negative impacts of the contamination from the fossil fuel industry, those impact the population disproportionately. So a lot of times it's poor people, it's historically underrepresented people, it's historically marginalized people who are feeling the impacts of those environmental problems disproportionately compared to other people. And so he talked about siloed environmentalism, and I thought that was a very interesting term. You can see here how I used this whole space down here at the bottom to capture it, because what he is saying is basically, for a long time, environmentalism has been a luxury for people who are able to go out and enjoy national parks in their leisure time. But he thinks that the direction things are going in now, that environmental justice and environmentalism or conservation in general, those topics are all the same thing, so that people in Bangladesh who whose neighborhoods are being flooded because of climate change, they need the same things that the puffins need. Both of those people will benefit from regulations or benefit from something that slows down climate change, that slows down the warming of the oceans, because warm oceans are bad for poor and marginalized people living in Bangladesh. They're bad for the puffins. They're bad for poor and marginalized people living in Louisiana who are going to get hit by harder hurricanes and stuff like that. So he talked about how in contrast to that is the idea of siloed environmentalism, where like, oh, let's save this pretty bird so that rich people can look at it. So I thought that was really powerful, because this is an example of how this conference, there's some conversations that are coming up that is where the rubber meets the road, because it's really easy to say, oh, nature journaling, it's helping the environment, blah, blah, blah. It's easy to say that, but it's important to think about like where the rubber actually hits the road. So I was really glad that he brought up those topics. And then after him and I keep forgetting the other guy's name, Steve. After him and Steve spoke about Project Puffin, we also got to learn from Sue Schubel, aka Seabird Shoe, who does some amazing creation of decoys. These are the decoys that Steve learned about can be used for conservation, and now there are projects all around the world that are using that idea of social attraction. Social attraction is the term for it. That's when you put up a decoy. So now Sue showed us in the next session, so here you can see this was a talk, Seabird Decoy Studio Virtual Tour with Susan Schubel. She takes us around her studio, shows all of these little models. They're basically like models that look like little birds, all different species. They basically trick those birds into going to a new area. So it's really interesting to learn about that, because it's being used in all kinds of places. They're also making sound systems. She had some funny quotes about people are just animals. Individuality is not limited to the human animal. So she had a lot of interesting stuff about conservation projects. I ended up taking some notes about her talk in a smaller sketchbook. So this is something that I recommend as a strategy if you're trying to marathon the conference, or just something to know about. It helps with nature journaling too, is you could have a smaller sketchbook. Let me pull mine out. This is the one I use. So maybe like you're eating dinner, or maybe you're on a bus or something and you can't bring out your big sketchbook, but what you can do is you can cut out those pages and attach them in later. So check this out. I was listening to her talk while I was eating dinner, and I was able to make these sketches here and notes in a separate sketchbook and then attach them in here later with tape. How cool is that? And then I did make a little tab to help hold that in, and it says decoy details. So some decoy details. It was really cool. So I recommend that if you're interested in the conservation side, today is where a lot of these conservation topics came up. So we had Steve and Derek. Then we had Sue. And then after that, we had this panel with a whole bunch of people, Ivea, Aisha, Anne, Shane, and Amy, all directed by Jack, or all facilitated by Jack, talking about conservation and nature journaling and how these connect. You probably already know from my interviews with some of these people that I wanted to see how they thought these things connect, and if people from the outside can see the connection. For us, within the nature journaling community, it's really easy to think like, oh, it's obvious. Nature journaling leads to conservation. It seems obvious to us, but it's good to think about what people from the outside think. Sort of like Amy Nezukumatato's talk and class about poetry, and the importance of empathizing with people who have a very different perspective for you. So is conservation and art and conservation and nature journaling, is that a clear connection? To us it is, but it's good to talk about it and really think about it from the outside. So this conversation It's called the Nature Journaling and Conservation Conversation. I know that's hard to say 3 times fast, with Shane and Aisha, Ivea, and Amy. I didn't end up getting to interview all these people, but you did see my interview with Shane, hopefully, and with Ivea. I have interviewed Amy in the past. Aisha and Anne, I haven't interviewed either of them yet, but it was a good conversation. If you want to learn more about conservation and how it connects with nature journaling, I'd recommend that conversation. But just to sort of summarize the end of the day, then the Backstage Pass, there were some interesting conversations. I didn't take notes, but one of the main topics was talking about hope. Backstage Pass, it always happens after the last keynote from 8:30 until 9:30, so they're probably still going right now. It is an option. Sometimes it might be a little bit late. For a lot of people, it's a little bit tiring. But the basic summary from today was we had fewer classes, we had 3 classes, and we had a lot more talks about conservation. So that's my summary for today, day 4. We only have 1 day left of the Nature Journaling Conference. So make sure if you're doing things live, get your materials ready, go on Shed, check what the resources are. Today, it was really important for some of these classes to have the right materials. Even for Verena's class, it ended up being really helpful to have this separate piece of paper. She also used a bone folder. So a bone folder is not necessary. I didn't have one, but it helps you folding paper. And then also Sushma's class, it's really important for this class to have the materials ready in advance. So check it out on Shed. If you're doing it as a video, it's easier. But if you're doing it as a live, like for tomorrow, try to look those up before you go to the class so that you're totally ready for the class. That's my summary for today. You can check out my Instagram at Marley Pfeiffer on Instagram. To learn more. Also, I'm really grateful for the people who gave me a couple dollars in the super chat. That's a way you can help me support these 13, 14-hour days of work that I'm putting in to cover the Nature Journaling Conference for all of you. So you can check that out in YouTube. It's really easy to just, in the super chat, you can give me like $2 or something like that. Or you can check out my Patreon and support me there, because everything that I do, almost everything that I do is free. And you probably already know that I'm dedicating my life to this work, and it doesn't pay off that great yet. So I'm living out of my car. I'm basically homeless in California, but creating lots of content. You can support the show. The next season is probably going to be called The Homeless Nature Journaler or The Nature Journal Nomad, but right now it's called The Nature Journal Show. You can support it right here and get tons of content, hundreds of patron-only posts and monthly videos. So thanks for your support. My main goal is to help spread nature journaling and to try to help save the world's biodiversity with nature journaling. All right, bye. See you tomorrow. Try to get in 8 hours of sleep before the next day of the conference. Bye.